The thalamus is a major sensory relay station. All general and special sensation except for the smell and afferent impulses from reticular activating system synapse here. It is an important integrating center for most inputs before relaying them to the cerebral cortex. Anatomical classification of thalamic nuclei. The thalamus is divided into three nuclear groups by internal medullary lamina, which consist of white matter. It has been divided into anterior group, lateral group, and medial group of nuclei. Anterior group of nuclei is mass of gray matter enclosed within the bifurcation of internal medullary lamina, and which is called as anterior nucleus. Lateral group of nuclei, the mass of gray matter present in the lateral part of the thalamus and is subdivided into ventral and dorsal group of nuclei. The ventral group of nuclei further contains ventral anterior nucleus, ventral lateral nucleus, ventral posterior nucleus, medial and lateral geniculate body, whereas dorsal group contains the pulvinar nucleus, that is the cluster of neurons lying most posteriorly, also contains lateral posterior and lateral dorsal nucleus. Whereas medial group of nuclei, it includes following nuclei, that is centromedian or interlaminar nuclei, dorsomedial nucleus, and midline nucleus. So this is the structure of the thalamus, which has been divided into three important group of nuclei by interlaminar fibers. It is divided into anterior, the medial, and lateral part. The lateral part further divided into medial and dorsal group of nuclei. The ventral group further divided into ventral anterior, ventral lateral, ventral posterior lateral, and ventral posterior medial, the lateral geniculate body and medial geniculate body. Whereas dorsal group of nuclei further they are divided into lateral dorsal, lateral posterior, and pulvinar. Whereas medial group of nuclei constitutes dorsomedian nucleus, midline nucleus, and centromedian nucleus. Functional classification of thalamic nuclei. Functionally, the thalamic nuclei can be grouped under two divisions: non-specific projection nuclei and specific projection nuclei. Non-specific projection nuclei, they receive afferents from reticular activating system and project diffusely to the neocortex. Impulse in them is responsible for diffuse secondary response and alerting effect of reticular activating system. The nuclei involved in non-specific projection nuclei are anterior group of nuclei, midline nucleus, interlaminar, and dorsomedial nucleus. The anterior group of nucleus afferents usually arises from mammillary body of hypothalamus via mammillothalamic tract, and the efferents goes to the cingulate gyrus, and it is involved in the it is a part of Pepe circuit which is associated with a limbic system and is concerned with the recent memory and emotion. Whereas for the midline nucleus, the afferents usually spinothalamic and trigeminothalamic, medial lemniscus, reticular formation, hypothalamus, and other nuclei. Its important function is it is a center for integrating crude, visceral, and somatic sensation. Whereas interlaminar nuclei afferents usually arises from the reticular activating system, basal ganglia, and other thalamic nuclei. And its important function is to integrate somatic and visceral sensory impulses before projecting this information to the cortex. It is also responsible for alerting effects of reticular activating system. Whereas for the dorsomedial nucleus, afferents usually come from hypothalamic nuclei. Efferent goes to the prefrontal cortex, that is area 8, 9, 10, and 11. And its important function is it acts as an association center for synthesis of crude and somatic sensation. Coming to specific projection nuclei are classified as a part of controlling motor, sensory, and integrative functions. Motor function, they're done by ventral lateral, where the afferents for this comes from cerebellum, that is especially from the dentate nucleus, globus pallidus, and efferents goes to the premotor area. Their important function is relay proprioceptive information and voluntary motor function, that is motor control and planning and programming. Whereas ventral anterior, the afferents comes from mainly the basal ganglia from substantia nigra and globus pallidus, and efferents goes to the area 6. Their function is mainly the motor controlling, planning and programming. The sensory functions are ventro posterolateral nucleus, for which afferents comes from spinothalamic tract, medial lemniscus, and efferents goes to the post central gyrus, that is area number 312. Whereas ventro posterior medial afferents comes from trigeminal and medial lemniscus from the face and taste fibers, and efferents goes to the post central gyrus, that is area 312. Their integrative functions are mainly in the lateral dorsal nucleus, lateral posterior, pulvinar, and medial and the lateral geniculate body, where lateral dorsal nucleus, for which afferent comes from superior colliculus, and efferent goes to the cingulate gyrus at hippocampal area. And lateral dorsal has a reciprocal connection with area 5 and 7 of parietal association area, whereas for pulmonary area, afferent comes from mainly the thalamic nuclei and cortex. Efferent goes to the cortex, especially the parietal, temporal and occipital area. And its important function is it integrates auditory, somatic and visual information. Whereas medial geniculate body, it is concerned with vision, audition, and lateral geniculate body, it is concerned with vision. So important functions of thalamus are: the thalamus is a great sensory relay station and integrating center for most inputs before relaying them to cerebral cortex, and the relay station in the pathway of somesthetic sensation coming from opposite side of the body, and relay station for impulses coming from opposite side of cerebellum on their way to the motor cortex. The relay station for impulses from reticular formation, and it's a relay station in the auditory and visual pathways. It's also a relay station for autonomic and emotional reactions due to its connections with hypothalamus and limbic system. It is responsible for maintenance of conscious and alerting response of reticular activating system. It is responsible for subcortical perception of sensation, particularly that of pain. And it is concerned with control of muscular movements via its connections with basal ganglia, cerebellum and motor cortex.